Hey everyone. Okay, so this video is going to be two discoveries that I witnessed, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it, that are pretty interesting and pretty important, I find. And so I want to share it with you guys because in case you guys might want to. So just a little background, this document here is just a document I'm working on. The terms I'm working with, young guy, cool guy, Loglin, that joined the community. And Logan had a good point. He said, he's looking at the steps on how this comes to science and how science takes off. And he says, there's no way, there's no way you can keep the OP terms as they are and bring it to science. It just won't work. And he's right. So some of their terms are even derogatory and stuff like that. So you can't really do that in the scientific community. So he made it his personal responsibility, which is, good for him, to narrow down on the terms. So I definitely support that. And, I wanted to help him out. And it forced me to organize as well, to get to the bottom of what these terms actually are, because he's trying to look for a word that actually encapsulates the NI, right? And I did this a while back. I wanted to do this a while back with someone else when I was translating it to Hebrew. But now we are doing the same thing in English. So anyways, from this, I had to make a doc and organize OP in some way. And what started to emerge is this idea of cognitive complexity, and how in OP you start off with a very low cognitive complexity and you get to a higher one, so a higher tier. So like, here's one of the lowest tiers of cognitive complexity. These three binaries actually end up creating pretty much all of OP except for the modalities. So from these three terms, you get these two. On the next level of complexity, you get these two sort of categories. You have the human needs, the cognitive needs, and the capabilities, the letters. Okay, and so you have these. This is this next level of cognitive complexity, and there are parallels. It does work. And then the next level of cognitive complexity is where things got interesting, because I only thought there was going to be two, right? So what happens if you combine two needs? You get the animals, right? For example, compliance with variance is play, right? So that's the animals. So you mix two of these, you get the animals. You mix this with this, you get the cognitive functions. You mix feeling, for example, with autonomy, you get FI, right? So those are the cognitive functions. And then here, this is what popped out. It's like, okay, well, what happens when you mix two of these? Well, there's already a pattern for that. It's the OP calls them the social temperaments. Okay. So, okay, interesting. All right. But now what popped out is all three of these things are on the same cognitive complexity level. And just like these two have some kind of parallel with each other, so do all three of these, right? And so we can see how that works between the functions and animals, because those are very fleshed out, right? So in the functions, you have the major and the biggest problem, the biggest imbalance, and then you have the relative balance. Okay, you have the same thing in the animals, right? You have the biggest imbalance and the relative imbalance, and so here that's double observing and double deciding, and here that's infodom or energy dom, right? And so in the scalars, you also have the poles, but not really talked about. Wait a minute, is there an equivalent to an observer, a double observing? Is there an equivalent to infodom in the scalars? This is a prediction. It's a pattern that should exist that isn't fleshed out yet. So let's go look at reality and see if that happens, right? So the old OP checklist, I remember back at the beginning, they actually took this relatively seriously. And now, like, it seems really woo to me. And always like, why are they taking this seriously? I was kind of even glad that they got rid of it, because it didn't seem very real, right? These seemed way more real, way more tangible. These ones just seemed kind of, what, right? What, SF, NF, NT, NF, ST? But so they used to be there, and they used to have them as coins back then as well, and they got rid of them. But here I'm saying, oh, maybe they shouldn't have, because these are just as significant as the functions and as the animals. So that's interesting. So let's flesh them out. Let's go to reality and look at what is the actual pattern. So this is just, so there is a pattern in reality. It told me where to look. Whether I got the pattern right or wrong, that's, that has to be fleshed out. But here's my guess. Okay. So NT, I was looking at potentiality versus SF, which is I was calling beneficiality. Is it like, what are all of the possible things we can do? And, what is beneficial to us? What should we actually do? Right. And that's a coin, right? Just because we can do it doesn't mean we should. And that's like Jurassic Park, the famous quote from Jurassic Park. It's like, okay, yeah, let's make a park full of dinosaurs. And it's pretty incredible, but we never stop to ask ourselves, should we do that? Right. Like, is that beneficial to us? And yeah, you could argue, well, that's pretty cool. It's like the SF of that is actually really cool. That's really beneficial. We can make a ton of money off of it. So, it actually probably did line up, but the idea is still there. So it's like I call that the way of life alignment. Like, yeah, we could do this, and what should we do? And let's make sure what we do is what we should do, right? So making that alignment. And the other one I call the meaning of life alignment, because one of them is just actuality. It's just reality. It's just solving the problems here in front of us. And ideality is, what is the meaning? What is the meaning behind everything? Because this becomes very mundane, just solving things in concrete reality, right? Is there meaning behind these simple little acts? And so this I call the meaning of life. It's like, okay, what are we doing and why are we doing it? The alignment of existence with purpose, right? And you can start seeing this in people, what their major imbalance is and how it comes off. It's actually quite interesting. And you can see where they are balanced, where they're relatively balanced. So I took a guess at what the rules are. That's beside the point. But what was interesting is, okay, yeah, definitely new information can pop out from old information, from the structure, and from seeing, okay, this is just as important. This is just as relevant, and it's not being talked about enough. Like, it shouldn't be talked about more, but it's like, it holds just as much weight as the cognitive functions, as the animals, and it's not being discussed. So I don't even know what the potential for personal growth would be here, or how it would cross checks and help you type, but it's somewhere where we need to pay more attention. Anyways, that popped out. Now, I have a lot more here, but anyways, what popped out, okay, so this is something else that happened. All of this, every so often, people come to me with projects they're working on, university students, thesis. I talk to a few people, okay? It happens. And not much usually comes out of it. And so someone wrote me an email, we're doing AI and OP. I'm like, okay, yeah, right, sure, okay. So I have a meeting with the guy. And it actually turns out to be legit. The guy's the guy and his team is like a team of cognitive scientists and a computer scientist trying to make some kind of cognitive AI consciousness. And that's their task. And when they were trying to do their task, they stumbled across OP. And OP was talking about double observing, double deciding, single observing, single deciding. And they tried to implement this inside, like the DE, the DI, right? They had to get all of that in there, tried to implement it in the AI, and they actually started getting results. And that was fascinating. So they started looking more into OP, and they stumbled across my videos, and they came across the cognitive entropy video. And it turns out entropy is pretty easy to track in computer science. It's called Shannon entropy. There's a formula for it. It's like, it's pretty well known, and it's pretty easy to control and track. So they started implementing what I was talking about in the entropy video, and it also was giving them good results. And so I know that when I was doing the video, I wasn't thinking about, what the use would be for it. And like, I wasn't thinking about it in terms of AI. I was just thinking about it in terms of what the animals are doing subjectively to us, right? And so and then I was like, okay, so let's think about with the AI. So I came up with this table. It's like, okay, there's also like, there's the solution. This is what I talked about in the video, but there's also a result, what it's actually doing. What is the animal actually doing? What's it actually attaining? And the need is basically the opposite of what it's attaining, right? And so just from this table, I started putting patterns together and seeing observations. And from these observations, I put together some diagrams. So I'm going to share with you these diagrams, basically. So first off, let's look at the animals independently in this diagram. So I have an objective reality on the top half and a subjective reality on the bottom half. The first one here is consume. We call it now seeking, again, subject to change. Yeah, that's another thing with Loglin. We both decided that until we both agree on the terms, we're not going to share them and make them public. So this document is going to stay private until then. And hopefully one day we'll share all of the terms together. So anyways, seeking, basically what it's doing is it's increasing, it's seeing that there's the root cause is there's a low subjective entropy, and it's taking in objective entropy, objective information, bringing it in, and thereby raising up the level of the subjective entropy. So what it's doing, what the effect is it's raising this low entropy that we have subjectively. Blast is doing the opposite. It's saying, okay, there's a high entropy on the objective world. Let's try controlling that. Let's try changing that. Let's try putting information out there in order to reduce the subjective entropy. And so that's what Blast is trying to do, is trying to reduce the objective entropy. So in the video, I said, yeah, it's increasing entropy subjectively, but objectively what it's doing is it's trying to bring the entropy down, right? Now, this is sleep. When entropy gets too high subjectively, sleep is going to try to bring it down directly, right? And then play is when objective entropy is too low, play is going to come in, conferring is going to come in and try to raise the entropy extrovertedly, okay? So that's great, that's interesting. But from this, let's try to group them together and get the patterns, right? So here's examples of words that need to be changed. So instead of skibs and douchebags, I call them disruptors and stabilizers. These are not final terms, but this needs to be changed. This cannot go in a scientific journal. It would be funny, but it just can't be. So the commonality for the disruptors is, okay, there's a low objective entropy or there's a low subjective entropy. In both cases, there's a low entropy and the disruptors are trying to raise that entropy. So the cause is the low entropy. So they're either going to play to bring up the subjective entropy, or they're going to consume to raise up the objective entropy, and to consume to raise up the subjective entropy. That's really interesting. Really, what this is saying is skibs are just bored. Skibs are just trying to get unbored. They're trying to liven things up in the objective world and liven things up in the subjective world. Let's just consume information. And so the stabilizers are doing the opposite. They're seeing high entropy in the objective world and high objective entropy in the subjective world. So really what they're trying to do is they're trying to blast to reduce entropy in the objective world. And they're trying to sleep to reduce entropy in the subjective world. So really what they're doing is they're just trying to reduce entropy. That's what they're trying to do. And they're just seeing problems and they're trying to solve all of these problems that have high entropy. Let's stabilize things. Let's make sure things get stable, right? Interesting. For example, like just from this understanding of the entropy and what the animals are doing, this is the best definition. Like I didn't do this definition. This is just entropy theory telling me what skibs are. And it seems to match reality. So it's like, this is actually the best definition I've ever seen for skibs. And this is the best definition I've ever seen for stabilizers. And I didn't come up with it. It's just the entropy theory is saying what is happening. So it's just fascinating that the best definition, and it's actually saying what's actually really happening. So for me, that lends credence. It lends credence to this and to what's happening to these patterns. Well, let's keep going. So mopes, for example, you see all they're doing is they're affecting their subjective entropy. So if it's too high, they're bringing it down. And if it's too low, they're bringing it up with consume, right? If they get too bored, they'll start consuming something. If things get too disruptive in their mind, they'll go and sleep. So really, they're trying to find that Goldilocks zone subjectively of where the entropy is just right. That's what mopes are doing. And in effect, they're reducing entropy, right? By keeping this balance, they're actually just reducing, yeah. Anyways, I call them regulators here. So the objective regulators, the crackheads, right? They're just looking at the objective entropy. And when the objective entropy gets too high and too disruptive, they'll blast, they'll bring it down. And when it gets too crystallized and too regulated, they'll bring it up with play. They'll liven things up. They'll make sure that the objective entropy is in this Goldilocks zone. And it's just fascinating. Like I never thought to even think about it in this way, but yes, this is very accurate to what is happening with these two types. Okay, what else can we do with these? Okay, let's look at the info and energy, right? Info energy coin is a coin that we're all trying to wrap our heads around. We're all seeing it's a big coin. We're all seeing that there's something there, but what is it, right? I even did that video a while ago. And this might seem like it contradicts, but it actually gives even more credence and more basis for it. So look here, the blast and the consumer are doing the same thing. They're taking introverted subjective information outwards to reduce objective entropy, and they're taking objective entropy energy information inwards to increase subjective entropy. So in effect, they're getting closer to this line. Like they're trying to make sure that the subjective entropy is high and the objective entropy is low. They're trying to mix the worlds. They're trying to make sure that there's no difference between a subjective world and an objective world. And that's why I feel so weird talking about this, because it's like, what, aren't they the same world? What's going on? There's a subjective world, there's an objective world. Duh, there is. I'm just constantly trying to make sure that there's no difference between them, right? I'm testing my subjective information and seeing if it's right, and I'm taking in objective information to move my subjective self, so that I don't crystallize too much into delusion, right? And so it's really trying to be not delusional by making sure these worlds mix, right? Fascinating. Like that is actually what InfoDom is doing. Energy DOM is trying to keep the world separate. If you get too close, if the objective entropy goes too low, too close to the line, it's going to boost it up. No, we got to keep these separate. And if the subjective entropy gets too high, it'll reduce it. And so what it's doing is it's treating the objective entropy objectively, dealing with that, and it's treating the subjective entropy subjectively, dealing with that separately, and making sure there's a separation between those two worlds. So really, InfoDom is trying to unite the worlds. Energy DOM is trying to separate the world so it can have a separate worldview on both sides. That for me was an interesting way to look at Energy DOM. And actually, ESFJ lady, what's your name? You're on one of my teams even. One of our teams, sorry, they're not mine. Maggie said something similar. And I'm just coming to it now, but this is what she was saying. I didn't pay much heed to it, but now that I'm seeing it's popping out too in the cognitive entropy, this is making sense. And it's funny because I started sharing this with Otim, who's a friend of mine in the community, and he's been with me the whole way and helping me process things too. A great guy. I saw him taking this information. He's like, okay, let's compare it to the objective world and let's compare it to the subjective world. And he's doing it separately. And my brain just doesn't do that. And it's the first time I noticed that it was happening. I'm like, whoa, this is real. Like you're trying to keep these two worlds separate. And it's like, and it's trying to authentically deal with the objective world objectively, and authentically deal with the subjective world subjectively, and not let them mix. And it's just, I don't know, it's just mind blowing that that's what they're actually doing. And so when they're trying to get the congruence afterwards, that's when all of the energy DOM conversations come out. They're trying to check, hey, is my subjective world delusional? Let me share a little bit of my subjective world, bring it into the play realm. And let's take the play realm, this objective world, and bring it into the sleep realm. And that's how they're going to mix and make sure that they don't become delusional. And it's just, wow, that's fascinating. And then the proof for that is, okay, if they're consume last, so they're double activated blasts, they're seeing, okay, does this work? Is my subjective worldview bringing results in objectivity? Let's test it out. Yes, it is. That's my confirmation. Whereas the blast lasts are saying, okay, let's consume more to make sure I'm not delusional. Let's take it out from the objective world and take it into the introverted world and see and make sure it's matching in that way. But it's not doing the other side. So it's found a way to try to figure out how it matches two ways, either by having those conversations, doing the play and the sleep separately, and then in sleep taking the play info and in play taking the sleep info, or either doing the double blast or the double consume. And that's how it's trying to stay undelusional, but at the same time keeping the world separate. So it's like, why? For me, it's like, why would you want to keep the world separate? Like, don't you want them to match? Like, what's the benefit in actually keeping them separate? Like dealing with this on its own and this on its own. And it's really interesting how, I don't know, just how I wanted to share this because I'm starting to see it more and more in all of the interactions that the two DOMs are having. And I think it's just good. It's just a very solid way to look at it, and a very solid definition that I didn't do, that just popped out of what entropy is in the animals, and looking at the commonalities and looking at what's happening and trying to understand, wait, this is what should be happening. Is it what's happening? Like, so for me, it's fascinating because this is doing intuition above sensory. It's like, okay, this is what the intuition is saying should be happening. Let's go check in the sensory and see if it works. And it's off-putting for me because it's like super surprising. It's like that ghost feeling. Wait, this actually works. This actually checks out. Anyways, I wanted to share that. Thanks for watching. And yeah, have a good one.